What's up guys, and welcome to another one of my deck profile videos. If this is your first time checking out my channel, thank you, I appreciate it. I feel like with the relevance of the Battle League Charizard deck coming out November 15th, we're going to talk about my favorite deck to play this format, Charizard EX. Now I know there are a lot of decks floating around in the meta right now that do a really good job, but Charizard EX has a very unique way of coming back from a bad spot, and I feel like a lot of decks right now want to take out a lot of your two prizers as quickly as they possibly can, and Charizard is like the ultimate counter to those decks in my opinion. I've played it against Raging Bolt, I've played it against Terrafagos, am I saying that right? Terrafagos? Something like that. I've tested it against Teal Mask Ogerpon, I've tested it against Miraidon, you name it, I've probably played it with the Charizard deck. So if Charizard is something that you've been really excited to play, stick around. If you like this kind of content, leave a like, leave a subscribe. Let's get right into the video. So we'll kick this off by getting right into the deck profile. 2 Charizard EX, 3 Charmander, a Charmeleon, Cleffa, 1 Dusclops, 1 Dusknoir, 2 Duskull, Pheasantipity, Lumineon, Rotom, 2 Pidgeot EXs, a Pidgeotto, 2 Pidgeys, and Radiant Charizard. All that stuff is pretty standard, with maybe the Dusknoir line, Dusclops line being a little bit different. A lot of decks are playing that right now, so it's not crazy to have it in the Charizard deck. It's really good at taking out problem cards that you can't switch into the active to deal with, or to get rid of cards early in the game before they get into their stage 2 and stage 3s, which can be an issue when you're playing against some other decks that really like to evolve things, or in the mirror match. The card's really good in the mirror match, prevents them from getting their Zard on board before you get your Zard on board, because that's typically what ends up winning, whoever can get their Zards on board first and start dealing the damage. Getting right into the trainers, we run the 4 Arvins, the 2 Boss's Orders, the 4 Buddy Buddy Poffin, Collapse Coliseum, 2 Counter Catchers, a Defiance Band, a 4 Sealed Stone, 2 Iono, 3 Nest Ball, 1 Pal Pad, 1 Toro, 4 Rare Candies, 2 Super Rods, 1 Switch, and 4 Ultra Balls, and our ace spec is Unfair Stamp. So I want to talk really quick about some of my techs that I run in this deck. I run the Switch because there's a lot of decks that heavily rely on pulling your Pokemon to the active and you sitting on it. Snorlax Stun is a good example of that, and sometimes you might end up playing your Lumineon first or playing your Rotom in the active first and having no way to get it off board without using your Toro to do that, which you can do, but the Switch kind of helps you with the decks that are really trollsy and tend to keep your actives there without you being able to retreat. It gives you another option to get them off board, so I run the Switch as well. And I run Unfair Stamp over Prime Catcher because Unfair Stamp in Zard deck is really good. You get your board built, you get your Dusknoir to take out whatever they have on their back row that can be a problem, or can eventually search for them like Pidgey or Pidgeot, and then you use your Unfair Stamp to give them 2 cards. So not only did they lose what they searched for, but now they have basically no hand to play with, and in a card game, hand advantage is very important, which, duh, I'm sure you probably already know that if you're playing this. All my other trainers, pretty standard stuff. Collapse Coliseum is really good in your Terrafagos build. Like, you let them build up their back row, and then you drop the Collapse Coliseum. Not only are you limiting the damage that they can do to you, but because it requires such a commitment to their bench and your bench in order for them to really be able to hit you hard, it really limits the amount of damage that they can do to you and makes it very easy for you to control exactly how much damage you're taking, which makes winning the game that much easier with Charizard. And last but not least, I run 5 Fire Energy and 1 Mist Energy. I wanted to give a shout out to the guys in Pokemon TCG for giving me the idea for Mist Energy, because it's a really good card. It essentially prevents effects of attacks from affecting your active Pokemon that has that card attached to it. So things like Devo and Gouging from Roaring Moon, those sorts of things, any kind of effect that would one-hit knockout, as long as it doesn't deal damage, those sorts of cards Mist Energy sort of helps with that, so it kind of gets rid of some of the problem issues you might have when playing in an event where you might bump into some decks that rely on that sort of knocking out your Pokemon via effect instead of via damage. So if you watched the Roaring Moon deck profile video that I did, first of all, thank you for being a Chad. I really do appreciate that. And second of all, you know that I go over the key players of the deck and what the essential combos are to get things going. So because Charizard has such a huge utility on what it can do, especially in the late game as the game goes on, if you find yourself in a position where your opponent has heavily tilted the prize trade-off in their favor, you can easily come back with Charizard. Some of the key combos are a little bit different than they were in the Roaring Moon deck. I mean, don't get me wrong, the deck's a combo deck, right? But in the end, it's really a bunch of mini combo engines that run together to sort of get your plays going, and from that point forward you can decide, okay, what do I want to commit to board right now? What is my next play? What should I have done? And what do I want to do to further my game state? So unlike I did in the last video, where I give you pretty much a step-by-step guide on exactly what you needed to do to get your Roaring Moons on board and get your energies on board, I'm going to break this down engine by engine and tell you what exactly the engines do and how they can help you further your game state. But I do want to say that because some of the cards that are so key to this deck are a toolbox card, meaning you can use them to get anything that you need for that particular turn, just keep that in mind as we move forward, especially with Arvin. Arvin is a toolbox card. You could use it to get your rare candies, you could use it to get your Ultra Balls, your Nest Balls, your Forest Sealed Stone, your Unfair Stamp if you wanted to. There's so much that card can do. So I'm going to kind of go over how they work together more so than this is what you need to do, if that makes sense. So I'm going to kick this off with two of the probably most used cards in this deck, Arvin and Buddy Poffin. We'll start with Arvin first. So the text on Arvin reads, search your deck for an item card and a Pokemon tool card, reveal them, put them into your hand, and shuffle your deck. Now Zard deck is a deck that capitalizes most on going second, so you want to keep that in mind when you play this card. But Arvin is the kind of card that you want to pull pretty much anything that you need in your starting hand, if you're going second, or anything that you might need for that particular turn to get your combo plays going. Whether that be something like a Buddy Poffin, or a Nest Ball, or an Ultra Ball, Defiance Band if you need it. There's really no wrong way to play Arvin. It's completely about what you need at the time whenever you're playing him. Typically, most of the time, that's either going to be Buddy Poffin or Rare Candy, along with Forest Sealed Stone or Defiance Band. So let's take a look now at Buddy Poffin. Buddy Poffin reads, search your deck for 2 basic Pokemon with 70 or less HP and put them on your bench, and then shuffle your deck. This is the card you want to pray that you start with, especially if you're going first. You can use this to pull pretty much anything in the deck to your bench that is a stage 1, with the exception of Luminion and Rotom. Both of those have to be pulled with a Nest Ball because they have more than 70 HP. And this is just my advice, really. It could be bad advice. I don't know. I'm still learning this game as we play along, but this is what I've done to see the most amount of success. You want to play your Buddy Poffin and pull 2 Charmanders to board. That way it forces your opponent to not hard focus your Charmander. You can pull a Charmander and a Pidgey to board, but then if they're playing a Duskull and you lose your Charmander, it doesn't matter if you get the Pidgeot on board or not, because Pidgeot's not a hitter, right? Like, Pidgeot can do damage, but your win condition is Charizard. So if they end up knocking out your Charmander, that's another turn you're going to have to wait to get your Zard on board, which is another turn that gives them more time to build up more advantage, and you don't want that to happen. You want your Charizard to be on board as quickly as possible. And then, if you end up pulling another Buddy Poffin via Arvin, or if you just get really lucky and start with 2 of them in your hand, then you can pull your Pidgeot and your Duskull to board. If I ever get the opportunity to play 2 in the same turn, I'll always pull 2 Charmander and a Pidgey and a Duskull. If you can manage to get all those cards on board, you're putting your opponent in a position where he has to make a choice. Try to take out your Charmanders, try to take out your Search, or try to take out this card that can be a problem later. And we're going to go more into the Charizard build later, but don't discount Dusclops. Like, exploding for 50 damage on a Pidgey is really good. There are a lot of cards in the game right now where 50 damage is just enough to knock them out, and you'd be surprised at what knocking out that Pokemon in the early game can really do to give you an advantage. Many games I've won where I get Dusknoir on board or Dusclops on board and I blow up their Charmander or I blow up their Pidgey, for instance. And they keep having to commit Charmanders and Pidgeys to board because they want a rare candy to evolve them and they can't do it because you can't rare candy on the same turn you play them. So let's go into another key player, Rare Candy. This is a good time to segue into that. Rare Candy's card text reads, choose one of your basic Pokemon in play. If you have a Stage 2 card in your hand that evolves from that Pokemon, put that card onto that basic Pokemon to evolve it, skipping the Stage 1. You can't use this card during the first turn or on a basic Pokemon that was put into play this turn. And while we do run Charmeleon and Pidgeotto, Rare Candy is a part of your Win-Con combo. Win-Con combo. Man, that's really hard to say. You will end up using this card most with Charizard and Pidgeot, although you can use it with your Dusknoir as well. You can actually do a really cool thing with this card involving Pidgeot and Charizard, where if you have one rare candy in your hand and Pidgeot in your hand, and you've played a Pidgey to your bench prior, you can use the rare candy to evolve into your Pidgeot, and then use Pidgeot to search for your other rare candy to evolve into your Charizard. And then, of course, you can always rare candy your Duskull into Dusknoir. I mean, that's just a combo you can do. It's really good at forcing your opponent to focus on taking that out or take 130 to the face, which a lot of times can be enough to either put your opponent's Pokemon into position to knock him out or just straight up knock him out and collect a prize to potentially get you 3 prizes a turn. It really depends on what the game state is like at the time. And that's pretty much all the key players in terms of your supporters and your Pokemon tools and your item cards. There are a lot of item cards that are in this deck that rely on whatever you've got going on in the game state to be able to use. Ultra Ball, Nest Ball, Counter Catcher, Unfair Stamp, things like that completely depend on the game state, what you think will win you the game, and what you need to do in order to make plays to put your opponent in a position where they can't come back. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the Pokemon that are key players in this deck. And we'll start with, of course, the big boy himself, Charizard EX. So there's a lot of text going on with this card, so let's break down all the text and then we can explain exactly what that means. Let's start with his ability, Infernal Rain. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 3 basic fire energies and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. That is how this deck is able to run such a minimal amount of energy cards and still be able to win as easily as it does. Very rarely are you attaching fire energies from your hand to your Charizards. Your Charizards will pull the energies you need without you having to even do that. Alright, now let's go over the reason why he is your win con, his attack, Burning Darkness. Burning Darkness takes 2 fire energies and it does 180 plus damage. This attack does 30 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. First, let's just say that 180 damage is nothing to laugh at. Like that takes out almost any regular V monster. Like we're talking like you're doing 180 damage to like Rotom or Luminion or Zoroark or Giratina. Like those are all more than 180 health, but you're hitting them really hard. And there are ways to manipulate how many prizes your opponent has taken using Dusclops and Dusknoir, which we'll go into later, but it can automatically bump up how much damage Charizard's doing by 30, plus 30 more with Defiance Band, if you play the combo right. That means that you could be swinging with as much as 240 on your first attack with Charizard, all things considering, of course, depending on your game state. And that is insane. That's an insane amount of damage. The longer the game goes on, the more powerful Charizard gets. And typically you are running at least 2 of these. And using the rare candy method, they're not that difficult to get on board. It's very easy to get 2 Charizards on board and your Pidgeot. Speaking of Pidgeot, let's go ahead and talk about him. So let's go ahead and look at the text of Pidgeot EX, using his ability first because let's be real, that's what you're going to be using the most. Like, you can attack with them. You don't really want to, but you can attack with them. But let's go over his ability real quick. Quick Search. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. You can't use more than one Quick Search ability each turn. Let's go ahead and just say that there are very, very, very few cards in Pokemon that allow you to take any card from your deck. Most of the time there's some sort of stipulation, like with Buddy Poffin, it has to be 70 or less HP basic Pokemon. Or like with Nest Ball, where it says it has to be a basic Pokemon. Pidgeot doesn't have any of that. It's any card that you want from your deck right then, right now. And because of this, a lot of players will go straight into their Pidgeot before they go into their Charizard, which is cool, and I understand that. Most often I have the ability to go into Charizard first, so I'll go ahead and play him first. If you have Pidgeot EX on board and you don't have a Charizard on board to protect it, most of the time they're going to end up knocking them around before you really get the chance to use them to any kind of real utility. You might get like one card and then they're going to knock it straight down to the discard pile. You don't want that to happen, so you want to have your Charizard on board first, in my opinion. You can use Pidgeot EX to search for your rare candies, like I said before, to get your Charizard on board with the rare candy Pidgeot combo I was saying. You can use it to pull for your unfair stamp, to solidify your win, because that card alone, unfair stamp, will get you wins. It doesn't take a lot. You let them commit to board, you play your Pidgeot to search for the card that you want, you play that card, use your unfair stamp, give them 2 cards, you have 5 cards, and now you have everything that you need, as well as hand advantage. And I don't care what deck they're playing. They could be playing Tilmask Ogerpon, they could be playing Raging Bolt. They need energies to get those draws going, right? Like, the only deck that doesn't really struggle that much with is Gardevoir, which I have played a handful of times, but I have had no real issues because Charizard is a dark type, so you already have the type advantage going for you. The next 2 cards we're going to talk about are not a part of a combo, but they're both really good, Luminion and Rotom V. We'll look at Luminion V first because he's a toolbox card and it allows you to get any supporter card that you might need, whether that be Boss's Orders or Arvin or Iono. So we're going to look at him real quick. We play Luminion V for his ability, Luminous Sun, and that reads, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto the bench during your turn, you may search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle your deck. Like I said before, this card has multi-utility. I can't really give you a suggestion on what you want to pull because it completely depends on what you need in the moment. But I can say generally, if I'm playing Luminion, it's for Boss's Orders to pull something to active so I can knock it out before it becomes a problem, or in the late game, pulling like a Terrafagos or a Raging Bolt to the active so we can go ahead and knock it out without having to worry about any sort of retaliation. And something really quick I want to say is that you can technically use Nest Ball to bring Luminion from your deck to the bench, but you never really want to do that because the Luminous Sun will not activate if you're playing Nest Ball to bring it from the deck. It has to be from the hand in order for you to be able to use his ability. Next we'll talk about Rotom V. Rotom V, again, we're playing him only for his ability, Instant Charge, so let's take a look at that real quick. Instant Charge. Once during your turn, you may draw 3 cards. If you use this ability, your turn ends. So Rotom V is used mostly to unbrick your hands if you end up going first, or giving you a 3-card lead on your opponent should you end up going before they do. You can technically play this if you're going second to give you 3 additional cards to set up for on the next turn, which does sometimes happen. Sometimes you have to take an additional turn to set up. Charizard is a deck that takes setup in order to work. It's not a deck that you can just play like Roaring Moon with the basics and wombo combo your way to victory. It does take at least 2 turns for you to set up to be able to win, and Rotom V helps make that happen a little quicker. Rotom V and Cleffa have a lot of similarities, except for Cleffa is better because you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. We'll look at that card in a minute, but Rotom V is much easier to just use his ability. You can Nest Ball him to your bench and then use it, whereas Cleffa has to be in your active in order for you to use that attack, quote unquote, in order to be able to draw until you have 7 cards. The last little engine we're going to talk about is the Snipe package, the Duskull, Dusclops, Dusknoir package. This lineup is run for one purpose and one purpose alone: dealing spot damage to your opponent's active or benched Pokemon. We're going to take Duskull out of the equation for a bit, and we're going to look at Dusclops and Dusknoir because it's their ability Cursed Blast that really makes them good. Both Pokemon run the ability Cursed Blast, but there are a few key takeaways that we're going to look at that differentiate the two between each other. They both read that you can only use the ability once a turn, and they both read that if you use the ability, the Pokemon is knocked out. It's how much damage both of these Pokemon do that make them different from each other. Dusclops only does 5 damage counters, whereas Dusknoir does 13 damage counters. Which one of these two you're going to want to use is completely dependent upon what they have on the bench, what deck that they're playing, and if you really need to commit to Dusknoir to put them in a position to where they can't catch up. I personally find that these two cards do best when you can commit them to the board while Charizard is in your active, so that not only are you dealing the damage from the damage counters, but you're also making Charizard stronger by forcing your opponent to take one prize card. And that one prize card trade-off can really be the difference between winning or losing depending on what you're playing against. If them taking that one prize card is going to put you in a bad position, and if by playing those cards you can take 2, maybe even 3 prize cards in your turn, depending on how you play them and how you set it up. I personally find that oftentimes if I'm committing Dusknoir to board and I have a Charizard in my active, there's a high likelihood I could take 3 prize cards from that one interaction. And in my opinion, it can be worth it to let your opponent have that one prize card to trade off for half of your prizes. That's especially true if you have something really, really important in your prize cards, right? Like if you're looking at only having like one Zard or no Zards, and you're able to get your Dusknoir on board and you have to fight with your Pidgeot, then there is a good chance that you might be able to maybe take an EX Pokemon and also snipe one of their back row cards to take 3 cards and hopefully get into the Zard, or, you know, if it's a Pidgeot in your prizes, maybe get into your Pidgeot instead. Because this deck does run a minimal amount of EX Charizards and EX Pidgeots, there is the likelihood of you having those key cards in your prizes, and having them in your prizes and no way to get them out is basically a death sentence for you. So you want to make sure that you have the ability to take those prizes when you need to. And there are a few better cards than Dusknoir to make that happen, honestly. There are a few more Pokemon I want to go over in this deck profile before we move on to some plays that you can do with this deck. And I also realize that there are a ton of trainer cards I didn't go over, so we're going to put all those on screen and tell you what they're used for as well. But first, let's talk about the Stage 1 Pokemon, Fezandipiti, Radiant Charizard, and Cleffa. So we are running the Stage 1 Mons to give you other options to get into your Charizard EX and your Pidgeot EX. They also kind of help with Devo if you end up bumping into that when you're playing at a locals or a regional. Because if you play Charmander and then you rare candy into Charizard, if they do use de-evolution on you, you will go back to a Charmander. That will mean getting another rare candy, right? But if you get devoed back into a Charmeleon, it's a little bit easier to come back from that. It doesn't require so many cards. It doesn't require a rare candy, for instance, because you're only running 4 of those. It just gives you more options to get into your big boys more consistently. Fezandipiti's sole reasoning for being in this deck is consistency. Fezandipiti is a punishment against your opponent for knocking out your basic Pokemon. You can also use it to come back if you lose your Pidgeot or your Charizard, but I find it works optimally if you put a basic in your active and then they knock it out, and then you can use Fezandipiti to kind of draw the 3 extra cards off of it so you can commit to your bench. Cruel Arrow does do 100 damage to a Pokemon in the form of an effect, which can sometimes clutch you some wins, get you some knockouts. But hardly ever do I find myself committing the energies to Fezandipiti to actually use the attack. This deck has far better attackers, even Pidgeot is a better attacker, unless you need some sort of way to deal damage without the actual damage of an attack being the reason why or how you're hurting them. Cleffa again is another consistency card. Looking at the stats of Cleffa, you wouldn't really think much about him. 30 HP, right? And its only attack, quote unquote, is Grasping Draw, which lets you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. But he's a basic. The 30 HP doesn't really matter if you're getting the Grasping Draw off anyway, and his retreat cost is 0, so if he doesn't knock it out, then you can just retreat him for free to put your Charizard up on board. Cleffa works really well at unbricking your hand if you're able to get your little mons in the bench, but no way to get any additional cards to your hand to get your rare candies or your Arvins. Cleffa's really good at pulling those cards. Try to make it a little bit easier for you to win that game in the next couple of turns, or at least be in a position to where you can predict whether or not you're going to win in the next few turns. Last one is Radiant Charizard. And since Charizard does actually battle in this deck, we are going to take a more thorough look at him. Radiant Charizard is 160 health, Fire type, Pokemon, basic, not a EX basic, that's important. His ability, Excited Heart, with his attack, Combustion Blast, are really good in the late game, so we're going to go over both of those in a one fell swoop. Excited Heart. This Pokemon's attack costs 1 colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. And then Combustion Blast reads, during your next turn, this Pokemon can't use Combustion Blast, but it does 250 damage. 250 damage is an insane amount of damage for a basic Pokemon to be dealing. And while if you use Combustion Blast on this turn, you won't be able to use it next turn, it puts your opponent in a position where he has to either switch him out to fight your Charizard, which hopefully if you're able to use Combustion Blast, then you can already knock out pretty much anything Charizard's got on board, or take down the Charizard now and hope that one prize will be enough when you're able to take multiple prizes at the same time. Now with all this being said, there is the elephant in the room, right? Let's talk about that retreat cost. Like, good lord, 3 colorless is an insane amount of energy to commit to any Pokemon in this deck that's not Charizard EX, but to use them to retreat him? Like, I pray that you never see this card as the first Pokemon you get in your hand, and it's the only basic you get, because if you put this dude in your active, your opponent will force you to sit on him. Trust me, I can tell you from experience. They will force you to sit on him, and they will force you to either power him up, or try to find a way to get him off your active. Standard players that play this deck are not playing Switch, they're only playing Toro. So that means that if you're using your Toro to get this thing off board, not only are you using your trainer, you're also using your Toro, which is really helpful for getting your Luminions and your Rotom Vs off board. You don't want to use Toro to take your Charizard off board, because Luminion and Rotom V become more of a liability the longer the game goes on. They're not Pokemon you want to sit in your active. You want to find a way to either get them in your hand or get them in the discard pile as quickly as you possibly can without them getting knocked out. Those are just some things to take into consideration if you choose Radiant Charizard to be your Radiant Pokemon in this deck. There is always the chance you could start with him in your hand as your only basic, and then if that ends up happening, it's going to be a rough ride for you. Okay, so with all the key players gone over, we're going to put up on screen now all of the other cards I didn't go over, because all of these cards have a multi-utility and purpose. Charizard EX is probably the easiest deck to play in terms of the combos that you can commit to board and how easy it is to get them out. But because the deck also relies on the pilot knowing when to switch gears, right? How many prizes is your opponent taking? How many prizes can you afford to let them take? How much damage can Charizard do? What do you need in your hand with Pidgeot EX? These are all things you have to think about when you're playing this deck. And because of that, I say that when you play Charizard, you need to know whatever decks people are playing whenever you take this deck to a locals or a regionals. I'll always advocate that if you're going to go to a top tier event, especially if you're going to go to like a regionals event, always do your research on the decks that you're playing. And I don't mean just read about it. I mean, find a buddy, get together with them, even if it's on TCG Live, play with them, learn the ins and outs of the decks. Really pay attention to what your opponent is doing. If it helps you, you can watch other videos, maybe watch my video, hint hint, about other decks, what combos they're going to go into, exactly what the deck wants to do, what its win con is, and knowing these things are important in any deck you play. But with a deck that requires you to know when to switch gears as much as Charizard does, I would say it does more so in this deck than the last deck I did a profile on, Roaring Moon. Because while Roaring Moon wants to take 2 prize cards every single turn that goes by, in fact that deck pretty much has to take 2 prize cards every single time a turn goes by, and that's why it's so turbo-y and combo-y and it wombo combos things to death, because it wants to get those prizes as quickly as humanly possible. Like, it wants to take them way before your opponent sets up. Charizard doesn't really care because it takes time to set up Charizard. You can still win with Charizard and only take a few prizes here and there. Now, taking 2 or 3 prizes is always good, don't get me wrong, but Charizard can still win the long game even if you are only taking 1 prize card a turn. As long as you know what you're hitting, what you're taking, and the cards that you want your opponent to not be able to use. And lastly, I just want to throw this out there about Mist Energy in particular. Mist Energy's actual effect is only really good in a handful of matchups. Decks that force you to devo or force you to take damage due to an effect that is not actual damage. So like, for instance, if somebody were to try to blow up Charizard with another Dusknoir, which does happen, it's not really going to matter so much because its effect is what's dealing the damage. You're taking 13 damage counters, right? Whereas with Roaring Moon, gouging doesn't actually deal any damage. It just says knock out your opponent's active Pokemon. Those things do matter when you're going to play Mist Energy. If you decide to play that card, keep in mind that it doesn't stop effects that deal damage to you, like actual damage. It only stops the effects of attacks that would knock out your Pokemon. And if you've made it this far into the video, I really do appreciate it. You guys really do seem to like these, so I really do appreciate you sticking around and watching my content and enjoying it and liking the shorts and just being around here for me. I'm learning this game as I play, but I do tend to like learn every in and out of a deck I possibly can before I put this information out there. So if you like this stuff, like and subscribe and tell people about it. Tell everybody about it. It would be really cool if everybody knew about it, right? Thank you all from the bottom of my heart again for being as supportive as you have been. I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.